So for this last third of today, we will be talking about the international experience in countries, how they survey their trust, how they build mission-critical and secure systems, and how they think about voting technologies and internet voting. So it's a two-part presentation. First, we will have a talk, a presentation, and then we will have a discussion. The talk will be given by David Dueñas-Cid from the Gdansk University of Technology, who will be sharing with us the experiences from several countries at once. That's why he gets the longer talk. So, David, please.
Great. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. In fact, it's the second time I'm in this room in my life. The first one I came for a meeting where they were explaining how to get PUT grants. So it's nice to come here and to talk from the other perspective. Because although, as I was introduced, I'm working in Gdansk University of Technology in Poland. I'm originally from Catalonia, but I was working and living here in Estonia for a few years, so I'm really happy, let's say, to come to a place that I consider to be somehow, I don't know if second or third house, but somehow a place that it's comfortable. And it happens when you go to a room and you see some people that you already know, that it's like, okay, that's some place that it's very welcoming for me. I'm a researcher by training. I'm a sociologist. I'm researching on somehow the intersection between sociology, technology, and democracy. I started doing my research on sociology, but then it happened that I started working in things related with internet voting, and then all my interests, let's say, came together, and I'm doing, anyway, there's no need to talk much about that, but I'm doing some things connected with internet voting and so on. As some of the people know here, we organize one conference on internet voting that some of you have been. And also, I'm currently doing one research that I'm going to talk about it, which is Electrust project. It's a research that is funded by European Union and by the Ministry of Science of Poland. And I'm saying that because some of the people who is here in this room, I interviewed you in some moments of my research. So I'm thankful not only for the invitation, but also for the time you devoted to me. It's also a way to pay a bit back the work that I did. This is somehow what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to present first what is the research project that I'm working, because it's a way of framing a bit the things that I'm going to talk about. Then I want to make a fast theoretical overview on what we understand about trust and distrust and some neighboring concepts, because it can put nice ground for further discussion. And then I will go to the inputs of 3 of the case studies that I'm trying to do. So first of all, the Electrust project, I mean, basically, everything comes from, as I said, I'm a sociologist, I'm one of the organizers of the Internet Voting Conference, that it's impopulated by lots of cryptographers. And many of the cryptographers, when they talk about trust, they talk about something that it's not so much connected with the thing that, for me, as a sociologist, I understand by trust. Meaning that when we talk about trust, quite often we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about the technical robustness of the system, and for me as a sociologist, when I think why a citizen would trust an internet voting system, these things are not necessarily the first one that come to my mind. And that put the question of, okay, which are the other things that we could include in a research on trust to understand why users, why citizens are using that. And therefore, I finally applied for this project, got the money. I'm doing some case studies in different countries, amongst them Estonia, Australia, Poland because they are paying, not because they are introducing internet voting, but it opens the door for some other elements that could be interesting for discussing on how to introduce voting technologies or transform, let's say, the management of elections. The Netherlands, Norway, and Switzerland. And how I'm doing that, basically I'm doing a 2-step methodology. I'm having interviews with experts. Again, some of them in this room I interviewed you as experts. And then I'm running a Q methodology, which is some kind of method that it collects different positions and different discourses from people who are for and against internet voting. And then we confront citizens on how much they agree with the statements that are being raised. And it allows to create profiles of people that they trust in certain elements and others who trust in certain others. So this is mostly what I'm doing. Then, let's focus a bit on the concept of trust. Trust is a concept that is very difficult to define. I mean, it's very difficult to define because it's very easy to define. And this is an interesting paradox. It's easy to define because everybody knows what is to trust someone. It's very easy to define because we all can build a definition of what trust is, but that makes it very difficult to use in academic terms, because then everybody's coming with a different definition. And the first step that I was doing on my research project was trying to understand what do we understand by trust, which is the core of the definition of trust. And then you start seeing, when you open the dictionary or when you start opening the literature and seeing who wrote about trust, that there are lots of neighboring concepts that they are not particularly clarifying the definition of trust, but they are bringing more noise to the definition of trust. In some research, you can see, especially in the topics related with information studies, that they use trust and trustworthiness as something that it's interchangeable, which in my opinion it is not. Trustworthiness is something different than trust. In other environments, they talk about confidence, and confidence is not necessarily the same as trust. And then we have the concept of distrust that it's floating around, trying to see where can we place it on this kind of difficult combination. So just to start defining things, trustworthiness can be understood as the probability that someone or something behaves trustworthily in the future in different situations, while confidence can be understood as a narrow understanding of trust related to the expectation that something will occur as expected. It's interesting because finally trustworthiness relates with the capacity that we have to trust a system, that the system gives us the information that the system is trustworthy. Then it fits very good with the research that is generally done in information studies. The cybersecurity of the system reinforces the trustworthiness of the system. But the confidence on the system, it's something that is more related with the knowledge that the citizens have on how the system works. Let's put it in a way, if a system is fully transparent and I can understand everything about this system, I am confident that the system will perform as it's expected. Therefore, I don't need to trust. So the more information we have, let's say, the less need of trusting the system, and the less information we have, the more need of creating some parallel systems that allow us to trust on the system. We will come back to that in a while. Second issue that it's important here, the difference between trust and distrust. Trust and distrust, they are normally approached in academia as two logical ends of the same continuum. So either I trust, either I distrust, and it's very easy to place myself. Then you ask me how much you trust, how much you distrust. We draw a line. I tend to trust, I tend to distrust. This definition is quite operational, but it's not necessary. Oh, here there should be something different. Let me see if I can. Oh, anyway, it will not work, so no problem. I'm trying to understand trust and distrust as two different concepts that obviously they are related, but they are not necessarily on the same continuum. So the things that bring me to trust, they are not necessarily the same things that bring me to distrust. I mean, the absence of something that is bringing me to trust, it will not necessarily bring me to distrust. And there are some elements, I hope that later on my presentation you will understand better that, there are some elements that can bring to trust and distrust at the same time. Some elements that are thought and are meant to bring trust, that they end up creating distrust, and some elements that are bringing distrust in the system that at the end they are ending up building trust, either on the system, either on the management of elections as a whole. And this funny drawing was finally saying that the research on distrust is not as popular as the research on trust, so therefore it's interesting also to pay attention to this other thing. Hope that we will not have this problem also later, because there are some dynamic slides that I see that when I'm passing, they go to the final part of it. Anyway, coming back to the definition of trust and bringing some concepts that might be interesting to consider here. So in the act of trusting, we are putting ourselves in a position of vulnerability in front of others. And taking this position involves some sort of risk. So when I decide to trust an internet voting system, finally, I'm putting myself at risk that the system is not going to work. And at the same time, or hopefully, yeah, of course, generally it will work, but I put myself in this position of vulnerability, and I take some sort of risk. What is important here to understand it from the sociological perspective is that without trust, it's really difficult to create the scenario in which some things can occur. So that's something that all the international organizations that research on internet voting or on elections, they put the focus on. Without trust, it's better not to introduce an internet voting system because therefore the people are not going to use it. So the definition of trust, let's say, helps to create human cooperation that allows taking some actions and taking some things, making some things happen. But at the same time, trust is very closely related with knowledge. As I said before, The more we trust, the less need we have, the more we know, the less need we have to trust, because we can be confident that some of the things work. Therefore, it's interesting sometimes to make this kind of explanations in which you are trying to be transparent on how the system works so the people can understand how it works, and then there are less questions related with the trustworthiness of the system. But at the same time, the questions, they go to another dimension. Probably you know it pretty good here in Estonia, because some of the debates about trustworthiness or not trustworthiness of the internet voting system, they are not necessarily technical, but they are very political. So there we can see how the debate, the more information we have on how the system works, the more we get out from the concept of trustworthiness, and the more we approach the logic of confidence. And there are other aspects that we should consider in order to understand why the people would trust on the system or would not trust on the system. One of the final slides on this definition of trust, connected with the properties of trust. I mean, as I said, one of the things that I did on my research was making a literature review on who was writing about that. Of course, I'm biased because I'm a sociologist, so these three researchers that you have here, three of them, they are sociologists. But there are three interesting properties that different authors mentioned about trust. First of all, that trust allows to reduce the complexity. Trust can be understood as a human mechanism that allows us to reduce the complexity. We don't need to ask ourselves every time, do I trust the system? Therefore, we start using the system. We can see it, for example, here in Estonia, the rates of turnout, of usage of internet voting, how they increased, and probably some of the people, they are not asking themselves anymore if the system is reliable or not, but they are just using the system, because finally that reduces the complexity, and we don't need on every election to ask ourselves again if we should trust the system or not. Second idea, trust is based on a knowledge asymmetry. This relates very good with the research that Mikkel was doing in the past, that Mikkel Solberg was doing in the past, for example, on the party queues. So, for example, how the discourses of politicians, in this case, they can help the people to take a position about trust. So it's based on some kind of knowledge asymmetry, that the fact that somebody is imposing trust on one particular person who is explaining me that I should trust on that, and therefore I don't need to learn how to use the system, I don't need to understand the whole system by myself, but I can rely on somebody who really understands how the system works. And the third one, that it's very well connected with the research that I'm doing, is that every trust requires some level of distrust. So distrusting the system, it's something that in the end, it's quite healthy, because it allows to keep asking some of the questions that are relevant for the system to be constantly updated. So everybody who is challenging the whatever technological system, at the end, by bringing this trust in the system, can contribute to build on the midterm, long term, to trust more on the system. So, for example, I know that here, there also, in every election, there is someone who is making some claims about trusting or distrusting the system, that there has been some problem with casting whatever vote and so on. Okay, this at the end, I can understand that for the management of elections can be annoying, but from the perspective of building trust in the system, it's something that it's kind of healthy, because it's echoing some sort of discourses that brings back to our mind that we need to keep pushing for a more secure system in certain dimensions. Finally, before jumping more to internet voting, one paradox. By trying to reduce uncertainty, by this process of trusting that is helping to reduce uncertainty, what we are making is, and by being transparent with how the system works, and by trying to increase the trustworthiness of the system, what we are making quite often is making risks identifiable, which there are many researchers that were talking about that, how this complexity reduction, it's reducing the understanding of the overall of the system into understanding 1, 2, 3, 4 threats, and then therefore we are paying attention to these 1, 2, 3, 4 threats. So interestingly, trusting allows to identify the risks, but at the same time increases distrust on this particular risk by reducing distrust on the whole of the system. Hopefully this is more or less understandable. Next point connected with that, and it's the last slide of trust. Generally, there are three types of trust: individual trust or interpersonal trust, institutional trust, or trust in technology. When we talk about internet voting, we put all of them together. That's what makes this internet voting more interesting than other fields where trust is being applied. Internet voting combines trustworthiness of the system, so the security of the system, but also institutional trust, because it's an institution who is providing the system, and therefore who we need to pay attention to when we are trying to understand if we should trust on the system or not. And that makes it very political. Again, you know it well here. But at the same time, interpersonal trust. I mean, I guess that you, living in Estonia, you are kind of tired of listening quite often that, okay, Estonia is so small that everybody knows someone, everybody knows a cryptographer that can bring trust on the system. I mean, I'm saying that because I heard that in several conferences. And obviously, I'm pretty sure that not everybody has like a cryptographer that they can call at 12 a.m. at night when they are going to vote and they can ask if the system is reliable. So I guess that this interpersonal trust is not reaching everything, but at the same time makes certain figures easy to identify and easy to know who these persons are. Either if they are for, either if they are against, it helps to build trust on the system. So what makes it interesting approaching trust related to internet voting is that internet voting combines the three different types of trust in one. And that do not happen in many other aspects, that they are either less political, either less identifiable, the people who are doing the things, either less problematic, let's say, when we are talking about technology. So, just to make a fast overview of the things that I said. Trust, finally, is the relation between two elements, a person who is trusting and something that should be trusted. So in this case, we have the internet voting system and the citizens. This trust is generally mediated by the discourses that others are making, either political parties, either experts on technology. We are posing trust on the mediators and not necessarily to the system. So for example, my father would use internet voting if I would tell him, hey, you can use it, it's reliable, but he would never go and get the cryptographic protocols to understand if the internet voting is secure or not. So we use generally mediators that are bringing for us to trust. And we can split trust into two different things. One part is the trustworthiness of the system, and the second, the confidence that we are giving to this particular system. And both of them, they have a difference in relation of the amount of knowledge that we have. Because the more knowledge we have, the more we are relying, the more knowledge we have, the more we are connecting with the logic of confidence of the system, because it relies more on the expectation that something is going to work as performed, while in the case of trustworthiness, we have direct knowledge about how the system works and how the system is provided. Both of these elements, they have an influence in the creation of trust and distrust. And the question here is to measure, or to try to measure, which part of this combination is having more influence on each of them. My expectation, and that's still a temporary work, so it's still not a final conclusion, is that the trustworthiness of the system is having more influence in the creation of this trust. And the confidence in the system is having more influence in the creation of trust. So citizens quite often, and we will see that later with the examples that I'm going to put, they have confidence of the system for things that are not necessarily related with the trustworthiness of the system, but with other things that are in parallel to the system. So do I trust the government? Do I trust the company that is providing the system? Do I trust, are the politicians for or against that? That puts me in a situation of having confidence on the system. While many of the discourses that probably election organizers are having, they are related quite often with the trustworthiness of the system connected with distrust. So the system, you are making big efforts to explain to the people that the system is trustworthy, that it's secure, that it has these properties and this other, but the people are not repeating these messages in positive, but when they find a weakness, they use the potential lack of trustworthiness of the system to create distrust. So let's say that both concepts have a different impact on the process of creation of trust and in the process of creation of distrust. And as I said, trust and distrust, they relate with certainty, uncertainty, with risk creation, and so on and so on. Okay, now I realize that I have a clock here, and I was panicking a bit because the clock is marking 27 minutes, and I know I have half an hour, and I thought that it was going up and it's going down. So I still have 27 minutes, not just 3. Then I don't need to run so much. Okay, internal stuff. So mostly, as I said, this is kind of a combination of some of the concepts that I'm trying to put here. My research is trying to see how these different elements, finally, they have an influence on the creation of trust or on the creation of distrust. And therefore, what I'm trying to do on my research is to approach different cases in which we can see how these different elements, they are being intertwined and they have an impact on the creation of trust or on the creation of distrust. First of all, first of them, The case of Poland. Poland, as I said, I mean, we had elections, because I'm living there, not because I'm Polish. We had elections last weekend. We're really happy with the fact of having elections and with the fact of coming back to democracy. But it posed some interesting issues, meaning that, for example, they still didn't finish counting the votes. And in the media, on the second one, after the exit polls, the Prime Minister-to-be, I guess, the person who is probably going to be, who is expecting to make the new government, was already saying that they won the elections, when a single vote was counted. That puts lots of questions on how trust is created on that system, because when you think about Poland, I'm sorry for my country mates, let's say, you don't think about a country where trust levels are particularly high. Probably you think about a country that it's extremely politically polarized, where everything is totally discussable, but then the exit polls, and people are relying that the exit polls are going to be the truth. There's one interesting thing there, because there's one party that has 8.6% of the votes, but if they go below 8%, they will be automatically out of the parliament, because they are some kind of confederation. If they don't get the 8%, that would change completely all the results. So in my opinion, it's an extremely risky situation to make general statements about trusting the results of the elections, and people are making statements on that. And that puts Poland in an interesting place to think about what would happen if they would introduce internet voting. Because the experiences that they had in introducing electoral technologies, they were not particularly successful. And the experiences that they had with transforming the management of elections, they were also not particularly successful. But the concept of trust is playing an important role on the acceptance of the electoral results. Even a single vote was still not counted. I mean, now, hopefully we will get the final results and we will know if the expectations are correct or not. But still, I will just talk about two cases. 2014, Poland was introducing a system for transmitting the votes. So as soon as they count, they have a really big paper. People are putting X here and there. Counting votes in Poland is quite boring, quite long-lasting, because there is not so many populations, so that it would take 3-4 days to count all the votes. They could do it much faster, but it means that the ballot that they are using, it's particularly complicated. They tried to put a system to transmit the votes faster, but it happened in 2014. They had local elections that the votes were counted, but they had a problem with transmitting the votes, and it took much more time than expected in getting the final results. We know that since the moment we close the ballot box till the moment we get the results, the time needs to be short, because if not, there is lots of speculation on what's going on. And in a country that is extremely polarized, the speculation is just boiling. Conspiracy theories, they are changing the votes, they are doing this, they are doing that, and everything was coming back to one technical problem with the system of transmission of the votes, that they were not reaching the final place. And a second thing, as they rely so much on the exit polls, on that year on local elections, exit polls, they are probably not as reliable as in national elections. And the results that finally they got, they were pretty different from the results that the exit polls were giving. And that, of course, that was a trust issue, because finally it's like, hey, we had an idea, we expected that things were going to be like this, the things are like that, then all the political discussions, they can start because we directly do not trust the results. So, input from Poland. When we are thinking generally about introducing electoral technologies, we are thinking about things that are happening around the election day. So when we are election day or election days in the case of internet voting. So since I open the internet voting system, till I close it and the results are being published. But everything happens in one particular part of the election period. In this case, voting transmission was connected with that, but it's already at the end of that. So one of the inputs from that, and I will later come to the other experience of Poland, is that the election period should be considered as a whole when we are talking about trust. Of course, I understand that in the case of internet voting, the peak of the discussions of trust occur in the moment the system is open, because it's when everybody's trying to vote, when if there is some problem, this problem is reported, and so on and so on. But still, we need to consider all the election period as a part where trust and distrust discourses could arise and could appear. Second example from Poland, not necessarily with the introduction of technology, but with the transformation of the electoral system connected with the elections that they had in 2020 during pandemic. That, of course, during pandemic, it was very challenging for everyone. It's a pity, in fact, that you here in Estonia didn't have any elections in the moment that the pandemic was at the peak, because that could have been also a nice experience to see how a country that has internet voting is managing elections when everybody is struggling. But of course, it was not to create a constitutional and political problem in the country, just to show off. But anyway, in Poland, they tried to make elections, and of course, they couldn't organize them like normal elections, and the ministers, they had the wonderful idea of going for a full postal elections and announcing that, like, I don't know, 6 to 8 months before the elections. I can imagine that in the electoral management office, the people started panicking as soon as they heard that, because suddenly they need to change the electoral system in 6 months and make it full postal. Of course, it dramatically failed. They finally had to cancel the elections and to postpone them for a few months later, and finally they made a mixed system in which you can vote in paper and you can vote by post. Just for the anecdote, the elections were not officially cancelled because it was legally, it seems, impossible to do that, so they had elections with 0 turnout, but the elections officially occurred, just that nobody show up. So anyway. But it can be quite similar to what the Lithuanians were trying to do, that they were quite inspired on the Estonian internet voting. They said that they were going to introduce it, and at the end they were not able to do it. But in this case, it was an alternative system. So it was not the only system, that was the risk that my colleagues from Poland were taking by doing that. Second case, Australia. Beautiful picture of Sydney. They used to have internet voting till 2019. When they cancel it, they have plans to open again the internet voting system by 2027, but just for a small part of the population, so people who are visually impaired. And people who are visually impaired, they will play an interesting role in this explanation I'm going to make. Basically, they had the internet voting system for a while. In Australia, voting is compulsory, so everybody has to vote. So somehow the state, in New South Wales, in this case, let's focus better. New South Wales, voting is compulsory, so they have the imperative, the government, to provide voting options for everybody. I mean, if I make a system compulsory and you will be fined if you are not showing up for voting, then I need to create the scenario in which it do not seem that I'm trying to find my neighbors. So I need to provide a system that everybody feels easy to vote. They introduced internet voting system partially for the pressure of the visually impaired people, because if not, they need to vote by phone in a system that it's at least funny. They call to one telephone number, then they get one identificator, they write this identificator somewhere, they call to another number, they identify themselves with this identificator, and then they tell, I want to vote for party A. But at the end of the day, they need to trust that the person who is at the other side of the telephone is going to press the button A or to put the ballot A in the box. So that puts them in a situation that it's not at the same level as the others. And they made a case on that, and they managed that the government finally would consider different alternatives for introducing different voting systems. And internet voting was working quite good for them. What happens is that internet voting is quite nice to show abroad and to show that, hey, we are doing nice and so on. And it happened that the system started becoming popular. And here comes one of the interesting things related with my research on trust and distrust. One of the main elements that popularized the system was once that some cryptographers appeared on the public television criticizing the system. They went and they said the system is not trustworthy, and they had their foundations. The system had some weaknesses. Probably we have people in this room who knows pretty good about some of the weaknesses of the system. But the fact that they appeared on the television, some people were there and they said, we have an internet voting system in place, and I was not aware. And I can use it because the system, it was announced that you could use it if you are living more than 30 kilometers or something like that from the place where you need to cast your vote. And this day I was planning to go to the beach. My beach is 30 kilometers far from this place. I will register myself. So when these people started going to the TV and saying that the system was untrustworthy, people started using more the system. So it's some kind of paradox, because somebody is telling you not to use that and you are going to use that. And to close just the story, because it seems like a stand-up comedy, finally the system collapsed because too many people tried to register on the system at the same time, and the system was not ready for so many people. So finally, those who were distrusting the system, they managed to achieve that the system was taken out because they made it more successful. So by trying to create distrust, they create trust in the system, and finally the system proved to be untrustworthy. That puts lots of questions on, of course, on how we work on creating the feeling of that we need to trust a system when somebody is telling us not to use it. And then we find another paradox that you will see at the end. I will try to summarize them. That we have some kind of competition between cryptographers and visually impaired citizens that both of them are trying to fight for a more trustworthy elections as a whole, but they are both having a different approach to that. So for visually impaired citizens, a more trustworthy elections would mean that we are able to vote in equal conditions as the other, and for the cryptographers that they were quite actively criticizing the system, more trustworthy elections means not having internet voting at all. And we have a paradox of two people that they are searching for the same, but they are having exactly the opposite approach to that. For one's one thing, for the others the other. Third case, input from the Netherlands, and this is the last thing because now the time is really flying. The Netherlands, again, they don't have internet voting. They used to have internet voting for some particular types of elections, but they were using machine voting. They were using some machines for casting votes that they were proven also on the public TV and also a few days before the elections that the machines were not trustworthy. So there was a well-known hacker in the country that went to the place where the voting machines were stored. He said that, could you borrow me one? I want to show it in one school. They said, yes, of course. He took this machine, he put a chip, he went to the television and said, I can prove that this machine is untrustworthy, and make the voting machine play chess in front of the audience a few weeks before the elections. Again, I can imagine that the Electoral Management Office was panicking in this moment, having several heart attacks one after another, because it means that we have obviously a problem, that we need to do something with these voting machines. On the next elections, they were so close that they still use the voting machines. They ran a survey to see if the people trust in the system, and the people were massively trusting the voting machines that they proved that they could be hackable. Again, it makes no sense if we just think about the trustworthiness of the machine, because the machine was proven to be untrustworthy. So the trust posed on that, it was connected with the fact that the people in the Netherlands, they trust the government that they are making the right decision. And at the end of the day, the government took some time, but make the right decision. They took out the voting machines. Now they are voting pen and paper, but still many people in the public administration, they are complaining because before the system was much more efficient, and some citizens are from time to time asking when we are coming back to that. So meaning that the system that was proven to be untrustworthy, at the end, they were not losing trust on the system because they still think that the government was going to take the right decision for them. Just to sum up some of these things. So I said that there are three types of trust. In this case, on the Netherlands, as all of that is a work that it's ongoing. The things are more developed on the case that I made on the Netherlands. We have three types of trust: individual, technological, and institutional. And we can try to put different concepts on how this trust is merging with the interaction that the citizens are doing with that. So, for example, in the relation with the technological trust and the institutional trust, we can try to think that the citizens would understand that depending on how the government is managing a technical problem. In the corner between individual and institutional trust, how the managers are reacting to that, and how the stakeholders and how the vendors are dealing with that, and so on. Anyway, here, this is too complex, I will not get into detail, but these are some of the discourses that I got from the people I was interviewing. So which are some of the things that they were helping to build trust or distrust in the system? The fact that they had to change the law to transform to take out the voting machines. The fact that, for example, all the debate regarding trustworthiness of the system was an absolute expert debate, and citizens had nothing to do because they were not understanding much on that. The fact that the hacker was a well-known hacker in the country and was people were respecting him because they expected him to do something good and not something bad. So all these discourses that I got, we can put them in this grid that I was trying to build, connected with the different understanding of trust and distrust, and we can see something that in other types of research we cannot find. That it's, for example, that there are some elements that are bringing trust and distrust at the same time. I will explain just these two because they are the most interesting ones, probably. The fact that the hacker was a well-known hacker in the country, and the people were not expecting that this is this image of the hacker who is trying to, I don't know, to mingle in the results, who is coming from a neighboring country, who is, I don't know, trying to do that because they want to put some particular person in the government that is bringing instability. In this case, he was a guy that he was well-known in the country, and he was a well-known hacker, and that was helping to bring trust in the system, in the final outcome of the problem, although he was bringing distrust on the machine voting. So he proved that the machines were not voting. He brought distrust on the setup of the elections on that moment. But in the mindset of citizens, that was going to make something that was going to be better. And even now, you talk with the electoral managers that they were in this moment, probably they would like to kill this person who is bringing so many problems. At the end, they are having nice words about this person because they said, yeah, he opened our eyes that the machines were not trustworthy. And thanks to that, we have a better voting system than the one that we had before. So that's an interesting paradox that sometimes when we are talking about trust, we don't see it. And another one is the overconfidence in the system, so to say. The fact that in the Netherlands, the people were not asking if the system, the machines that they were using were reliable or not, and that was taking out all the possible questions related with the distrust in the system, and at the end they were forgetting that of course technology is changing, it's advancing and so on, and they were stuck on the fact that the system is trustworthy, the people are not putting problems, so we can continue using that. So the regulation that they had some pages on security on the law, and the security was basically that if there is a kid who is throwing some water on the voting machine, he's not going to die because of the electricity. And that was all the security that they were putting on the system, and they were not considering that someone could put a chip in the machine and that could alter the results. So anyway, I know that the situation is very different here because I know that you're working really hard to keep it updated from election after election, but at least the case of the Netherlands in this moment was something that was breaking a bit because it was putting lots of questions, and there were some countries that they were taking out the voting machines because of that. Last thing I'm going to say, just to summarize. Hopefully my research is bringing some light on something. I have some questions because finally most of the research that we are doing in academia not necessarily is bringing answers, but it's passing from some questions to some different questions. In my case, I hope that I can contribute to bring more understanding to how trust and distrust work in internet voting, but at the same time it opens the door to other questions that probably need to be explored. And I just try to summarize them with different paradoxes that I am encountering when I'm making interviews. First one, how generalized distrust scenarios end up bringing trust to some external stakeholders, that they are unsupervised, that nobody's paying attention to them, but at the end of the day, they are helping to legitimize the results. So yes, it can be the media in the case of Poland. They don't have, they distrust each other, they distrust the parties, they have really bad relations, especially between the two more dominant parties, but at the same moment, what the media is saying and the exit polls are saying, this is truth, and we don't ask this question to anyone. The same happens in Australia, for example, where they don't have ID cards, so for identifying yourself for voting on paper, you go and you say, I'm David, I'm living on the street, blah, 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 and they allow you to vote. So if there's another David who is bad like me, so could go there and say the same street and would vote on my behalf, but when you ask them, they say, no, this is not happening. And it's like, well, I've been 2 months in your country making interviews, and I already found one person who voted for his cousin to avoid the fine. This is probably happening, but not in a massive scale that you are panicking about that. But anyway, generalized distrust scenarios that people, they need to rely on something to trust that the things are going on okay. So in the case of Poland, before having the votes, they already trust on what the exit polls are saying. Second paradox, distrust bringing trust, and trust finally bringing distrust on the system. The example I put about the cryptographers that were criticizing the system, but at the same time that brought more people to the system, and that was at the end what was making the system fall. So how is this spiral between trust and distrust dialoguing between themselves, that there are some events that are happening that we might not consider them important, but they are somehow introducing changes on that. And third paradox, that trust and distrust can occur in parallel, that there are some elements that can bring trust and distrust in parallel. Of course, there are some others that can bring nothing, neither trust, neither distrust. Like, for example, in the case of the Netherlands, the fact that most of the debate regarding the trustworthiness of the system, it was done at such an expert level that for most of the uninformed citizens that was having not an impact, neither in building trust in the system, neither in building distrust in the system. It was just, this is not with us. They will solve the problem, and all the debate on trust was related more with institution and with which machine, which type of machine we are going to use to vote. So anyway, just these 3 paradoxes that are stemming from the things that I'm doing, and that I hope that they are also helping to build the ground for a further discussion. And I think that's all. 1 minute, 9 seconds still written here, so.
Let's try 2 questions maybe. And there's one in the back. Please introduce yourself as well.
Okay, I'm Carsten Schumann. You're going to see more of me in just a few minutes. Thank you for the very nice talk. I just want to kind of tell you that in Australia, the last time this system was used was in 2021. And the reason why the numbers went so up was COVID.
Is there another question? Ernest.
So the idea that in this Australian case, when these researchers went to TV, that is it really so that it increased trust? Because it more seems to me that it simply made it more popular. People simply didn't know about it. And if you will measure trust, maybe it actually decreased the trust. But simply since those people who don't care about trust started using it. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, we can see it in that way. I mean, the fact of making publicity of the system, even if it's negative publicity, for some people didn't have an impact on the creation of distrust on the system, or at least not enough to avoid them using a system that they were not aware that was existing. So I can buy the argument that it's not necessarily building trust, but it was helping the system to be more popular, and it was not having the impact that it was expected on the creation of distrust. I mean, here I would say that one of the big enemies of distrust is convenience, meaning that the systems, they're generally, internet voting is generally so convenient that for some people, distrust needs to be really obvious and really targeting me and really, really having an impact on the fact that I'm going to take the decision to take out the fact that the system is much more convenient than others. And in the case of Australia, that was the case. I can still vote, I can skip the fine, I don't need to care much about what I'm doing, then this discourse that somebody's putting is not having such a negative impact as probably the people who are making the discourse would expect.
All right, we'll hear about that more.